Hey everybody, today we're going to be looking at the 8 different reverbs that exist inside Logic Pro. Yes, there are 8 different reverbs. Why do we have 8 different reverbs? We're going to look at that, and we're going to look at each one to tell you the strengths and weaknesses so you'll know which one to grab in which situation. Of course, the most recent reverb that we've been given is Quant Room Simulator in Quant Yardstick. This is by far one of the best reverbs that we have available in Logic Pro. It is very accurate. In terms of creating an acoustic emulated space, it's been known for that ever since it was released, and Apple went out and got the rights to actually make a clone of this. And so this is the reverb. It's really good. That aside, I want to look at each of the others. Now, there are 4 others which are by default included in the standard set. So if you go to the reverb menu, you'll see 5 different reverbs that are here. And then we have 3 others which are in the legacy mode. If you hold down the Option key and click on where you add effects, you can see the legacy menu pops up. This is Averb, Goldverb, and Platinumverb. So those are 3 which we will look at, although they're really there for backwards compatibility with old projects. Although I haven't really seen too many people opening ancient projects in the current version without many other issues happening, but it's nice to know that they're still there. So the second newest reverb would be Chrommaverb. And Chrommaverb is an excellent algorithmic reverb. That means that it's created and they used math to really create this and replicate the space based on a bunch of delays of the sound. It's great. I'm not going into the actual mechanics of the reverbs, although we will talk a little bit more when we get to impulse response technology. But this one is not an impulse response. This is an algorithmic reverb. It has 14 different primary algorithms. Everything from room to chamber to concert hall down to bloomy, airy, strange room. Interesting shapes, colors, and names, not always attached to reality. But for a long time, this was kind of my go-to for certain types of sounds, and it's a great reverb. However, it's not the most accurate to an acoustic space. It's really something that's like an alternate universe. With Chrommaverb, one of the things that they did was add some nice colors. And it shows you what the sound is doing. This is an example of a reverb which I use primarily for the synth reverb presets that it has. These are really useful when it comes to synthesis. So this might go in a track stack with a bunch of synths that I'm creating into one, or it could just go directly on the synthesizer's inserts. It's great for this one thing. That's what I use it for almost exclusively now. I have used some of the other options here. There's a vocal plate that I've used a number of different times, but I find myself having to EQ it and manipulate it to get what I really want. It doesn't usually come exactly perfect with any preset. You do have some nice features with this, though. You have the main damping EQ, which helps sculpt the original algorithm. And then we have an output EQ, which allows us to further sculpt it. And we have different things like quality settings and a modulation section, which I don't find myself using all that often, but it is interesting. Let's speed that up. Just adds a little bit in that tail. We also have the ability to change between the early and late reflections, but it's just a balance knob and no other controls. I think this is actually one of the areas, and when we get back to the QRS at the very end, that you'll see that the realism And the depth of the QRS is because of the ability to manipulate and work with those early versus late reflections. So a decent reverb, it looks interesting. It doesn't sound great in every situation, but it has its use. The next two, first of which is the Enverb or envelope reverb. This one does something that none of the other ones do, and that's why it's still part of the toolkit here. Even though we have QRS, Chrommaverb, and even Space Designer, this one does something a little bit more unique in the sense that we can control the envelope of the reverb and create an interesting tail that comes from it. And so with this, we'll look at this in a second, but it allows us a lot of control over that. If you look at some of the presets, you're going to see things like aggressive tail, like that. Let me turn this on. Fast reverse reverb. Let's drag that out a little bit. So it's a slower reverse reverb. Certainly there's other ways to get that, but this thing is really designed so you can make an envelope of whatever you want and implement that with such little effort. Let's have it go down like that. So you can do some really interesting things that it's hard to do in other ways. Here's a rolling up one. There's certain types of sounds that you could do this with sound design or transitions or different things with sounds. I mean, let's have that delay. Let's have that pulled out. Let's have this extended. Cool. Okay, so that's the Enverb or envelope reverb. Let's open up Silververb now. This is another one which is very simple and could be just what you're looking for, different types. It specializes in the modulation area. So we have a pre-delay, reflectivity amount, size, density, time, all very simple ways to control this. A low cut, high cut, and then we have the modulation section and then a dry wet. That's it. And because we have this on ascend, we can adjust that down a little bit. So you come up with some really interesting sounds when you modulate the reverb tail. But with that turned off, it's still an interesting reverb. Not what I would call the most realistic reverb, but it's just a nice, simple option if you don't want to have too many parameters to mess with, but you want some of the depth of the modulation and the room control. Piece of cake. Then we have a beast of a reverb, which is Space Designer. This is an impulse response reverb, convolution reverb. And so that means you can record something like a starter pistol or a balloon pop in a space, load that in here, and it'll have the characteristics of that space available to make any other reverb. Now, this can be used in so many ways, far beyond what this video is intended for, but let's just really quickly look at a couple of the options that we have with this. One of them being that we can load any impulse, and it can actually be an audio file. that's like a spoken voice or other sounds, and it will take the imprint of that and put it on whatever you want. But most of the time we use spaces. And you can get these impulses from Logic. You can also get them from other places. We have a lot of different ones that come with this, including surround sound and surround sound HD spaces. Everything from, right here we have a 19-second DAM level 2, all the way up to 0.2 seconds small wet room or a strings room. There are just different places that these were created. And so we have a lot of options with that that are very handy. Now, one thing I've just noticed, in the past, you could actually load an impulse response utility straight from here in the window, but that's not showing up. It is still inside Logic, though. If you go to your Logic app, right-click on it and say Show Package Contents, and then go under Helpers, you'll see there's an impulse response utility, and this can be used to use a sine wave to do impulse creation of spaces or gear. So this is a very handy utility that's still part of Logic. Again, not something we're going to go into a lot of depth here, but it's a part of this. We have a lot of control over what happens with the impulse once it's loaded. We have a lot of modulation type effects, crossovers, pre-delay, length sizes, all of those things. However, one thing I want to point out is that in addition to the sampled IR, which is what we're looking at when we load something, we can also do this thing called synthesized IR. And this takes different parameters, volume envelope, filter envelope, and density envelope, each of these three right here, blue, yellow, and green. And we change these things. And once we change them, it resynthesizes an IR to match those changes. So let's just do something crazy here. Here's a density. Let's make it denser as we go. Let's turn it on. So you get to use all of these parameters, and it synthesizes an impulse based off of what we're doing here. I love this tool. I love creating impulses. I've done a lot of research on it. I love synthesizing them using this tool. This thing works in stereo. It works in surround. It works kind of in ambisonics. And it's just a great tool overall. It does something none of the other reverbs do in the bundle. Okay, really quickly, let's look at the A verb, the gold verb, and the platinum verb. These were like the three that we had at one point early on. And you can see there's three different levels of similarities here. The A verb has the most simple interface, very lightweight. Then we have the gold verb, which has actually some really interesting things here. With the early reflections, it has more control over the early reflections than some of the other reverbs we have in terms of the pre-delay, the room shape, the stereo bass, and then the reverb section is broken out, and then we have a balance between the two of them. And then the second one, the platinum verb, is just like the gold verb, but with more. You can see the graphics change. I really like the concept with each of these. However, none of them sound that great. So we don't recommend using them, but it's kind of fun to explore with them. That brings us back to already having 7 reverbs before Logic 11.1 came out. And then, surprise, surprise, we get the Quant QRS. And it is by far one of the best reverbs I've ever used. I always wanted one of these. It was too expensive when it came out. It's too expensive to buy a hardware unit now, but this is it. I mean, this is the actual thing. It's not just a clone or an emulation or a cheap knockoff. This is it. And so what we get are some controls which give us realism to a space in a way that something would sound like in an actual space. And that's because they're really careful when they're working with these early first reflections and delay reverb levels and the reverb time multiplier. All of this stuff is so nerdy, and yet what we end up with is a very realistic sounding reverb. And the yardstick takes it even another level. And so this is what I've been using in most of my projects. When I do a vocal with just basic instrumentation, the QRS is easily my first choice. When I'm using things with synthesis, I'm using Chrommaverb. When I'm going for a very specific real sound, then I'm using Space Designer. When I'm trying to do something creative with percussion, I might reach for the Enverb, and I hardly ever use the Silververb. That's just the way that these all fit together. So now when I'm doing this, and I find that the default for the QRS is just so good that I find myself starting there and then manipulating it small amounts if I'm not finding that it's working for something I'm working on. It's one of the things I'm really focused on lately is Synthesizer V from Dreamtonics, and I feel like the QRS makes the fake synthesized vocals sound even better.
When you call, you hold my hand, see my face, and understand.
So good at making that just extra realism in partnership with a tool that's not real, but it's emulating something that's trying to be real. Putting those two together is such a great marriage because it enhances and builds upon that. And I found that in many styles that I've been working in lately, that the QRS just fits and works. And then I can go to one of the other tools if I need to. That's the beauty of having all of these reverbs. 5 of them, which are the default, 3 of them, which are legacy, and among the 5 that you have, each one has a specific focus, a specific feature set that enhance each other and aren't necessarily designed to be a replacement for each other. Okay, I hope this was useful. I hope seeing and hearing and talking about this is making a difference for some of you. The last thing I'll say is that if you're not doing this already, one of the things that you should be considering is using the sends over buses to an auxiliary track to put your reverb. So you have one reverb and then you're busing different amounts to each one of those. Okay, we could probably talk about that more fully in a different video, but that's just one of those things that you should have. Typically 1, 2, or 3 different reverb auxiliary channels, and then sending various amounts of your channels to that one instead of putting the reverb on each individual channel, except in cases with like synthesizers where you want to put maybe the Chrommaverb with one of the synth-specific reverbs, put that directly on the channel with the synthesizer itself. Okay, just a side note. Hope this was helpful. Talk to you later.